Good afternoon and welcome to this Euractiv debate supported by GRT Gas. I'm Brian Maguire. Our topic today is what are the challenges and opportunities for a European hydrogen corridor? You can use the hashtag EA debates for social media, and our social media team will interact with you there. And if you open Slido and go to hashtag hydrogen corridor, you can see it on the screen there. Hydrogen corridor on Slido, and you can send us questions. We'll take those questions during the course of the discussion as well, not just at the end. So feel free to get started on that, and we'll put those questions to our excellent panel in a few minutes as well. Same for the audience here today. We'll take questions on Slido and not with open floor as well. So please go ahead with that. So by 2030, hydrogen is expected to become widely used in Europe, and the hydrogen market will emerge. Hydrogen is a strategic sector for the decarbonisation and strengthening of Europe's energy resilience and autonomy. New infrastructure for its transmission and consumption is being planned and developed. But building infrastructure requires a supportive framework, allowing for forward planning and tailored financing mechanisms. And one major project that has been rolled out is the H2Med, which I'm sure you've heard about. Officially announced by France, Spain and Portugal in December 2022, with the support of the European Commission. In January 2023, Germany announced its willingness to join the project too. Relying on existing infrastructure and new pipelines, H2Med will provide a hydrogen corridor stretching from Portugal and Spain through France towards Germany and other countries. H2Med will be able to transport around 2 million tonnes of hydrogen to France each year, accounting for 10% of the EU's estimated hydrogen needs. And joining us today is an illustrious panel of experts. And let me introduce Stefano Grassi, Head of Cabinet to Kadri Simpson, the European Commissioner for Energy. Maria Spiraki, Member of the European Parliament, Member of the ITRE Committee as well. Great to have you with us. Rafael Hanato, a Senior Policy Advisor, E3G. Great to have you. Thierry Trouvé, CEO, GRT Gas. And Manuel Rodriguez, Head of Decarbonisation at ArcelorMittal Europe. So, 60 seconds to each of you just to kick off with your elevator pitch. Stefano, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Brian, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you to Euractiv for having me here today with you. Today is a bit of a hydrogen day in Brussels. I was attending this morning the Clean Hydrogen Summit, and there is a lot of confidence, a lot of positive vibes in the mood, but also you can sense among industry players a sense of hesitation on whether it is the right moment to move from projects on paper to final investment decisions. And I think this is exactly the moment where, as a European Commission and as a public authorities, we need to double down. I think it's a moment where we need things to happen. We need to nail down this year the gas and hydrogen market package. We need to nail down the Net Zero Industry Act and the last pieces of a regulatory puzzle. We need to make the European Hydrogen Bank operational. And if you want to connect all the dots, we need also to think about infrastructure. This year, we will have the first list of PCI, projects of common interest, which will include hydrogen. And I think we need to force ourselves to think hydrogen not as something that is consumed in a small cluster very close to where it is produced, but also to imagine that it is a commodity that will be transported along long distances through different means. And I think that's where the notion of corridors comes in and the projects you mentioned. So I'm very glad to be with you here to discuss it.
Thank you, Stefano. Maria.
Thank you very much for having me. I would like to add the line that it is important to have a holistic approach on the new era of new gases. And of course, we have to consider, first of all, that natural gas is not disappearing in a few years. It will insist and stay here maybe for more than a decade. We have also hydrogen, clean hydrogen, the definition, and we have also other gases, particularly biomethane. So we have to have complementary solutions. And by saying this, I think it is important that we have already in the pipeline two very important projects, the hydrogen for use and also the hydrogen for tech. We are waiting for the others which are in the list of important projects of common interest. But allow me to say that we have to insist on these parameters. The first is cross-border projects and cross-border cooperation. The second is to create ecosystems, not only local ecosystems in the hydrogen valleys, but also ecosystems in the area, particularly in the northeastern Europe, on which I come from. The third is to boost the tenfold of electrolyzer, and yesterday's decision and the announcement of the Commission is, of course, in the right direction. And the last but not least is in the framework of the Net Zero Act, we have also to support the deployment of CCS and CCU facilities, which is also important in order to decarbonize the existing production of hydrogen, which is grey, and we would like to become blue.
Thank you so much, Maria. Raphael.
Yeah, thank you first for all being here and for that opportunity. When we talk about hydrogen, there is a lot of excitement, and I do not want to kill the mood, but I would like to recall a few aspects and a few issues. For example, when we talk about hydrogen, we're not really sure yet what will be the demand in 2030. And as Maria is saying, gas will probably be here for the next decade, but it's also going to be decreasing. You know, when we look at the gas trajectory just with the Fit for 55 measures, we'll have 30% less gas in 2030 than what we have at the moment. So we do need to take some decisions right now on hydrogen, and that's why we have this roundtable. But at the same time, we do need to have the right data and the right assessment on what will be the demand by 2030. These things vary a bit depending on who you ask. And it's the same also for production. We know that producing hydrogen is going to be a challenge, either if we do it domestically or abroad. There will be some challenges. And the amount that we are actually able to produce, the amount that we are actually having as a demand for industry or for other sectors are going to have fundamental effects and are going to be very, very strong incentive for the building of the infrastructure of the future. So we do need to discuss that and to have this kind of informed conversation to know what we're doing and not having a free-for-all or some kind of infrastructure race that would not benefit most of the Europeans.
Thank you. Thierry.
Thank you very much for being here. We are, as Gas TSO, committed to develop and to accommodate the renewable gases of the future, biomethane, and of course hydrogen. We are preparing for that a dedicated hydrogen network. And we are working today on two types of objects, I would say. The first one are what I call the local hydrogen systems in order to decarbonize industrial hubs. And we have demands from industries that want to have hydrogen, and also producers that want to put their hydrogen on the pipe. The second type of object is what we can call the European hydrogen corridors, and you mentioned them in your introduction. Three topics I want just to put on the table here. The first one, that we should not forget the paper from the Commission 2 years ago about sector integration. I think it is very important not to oppose electrons and molecules, but to organize a proper complementarity between both. Second, the question of infrastructure. Methane, hydrogen, and electricity infrastructure is absolutely key in the energy transition to enable the decarbonization of the society. And third question, we absolutely need an integrated planification effort, including the three of them, at least, even heat, but methane, hydrogen, and power to prepare the future.
Thank you. Manuel.
Yes, good afternoon to all. Happy to be here with you. So the key point for the industry, or for heavy industry like steelmaking, is that we want to be decarbonized. We are committed to be decarbonized as ArcelorMittal in 2050. And the first step is really to change the process, to switch from coal to gas. That's the first step. And then to be H2 ready. Saying we are H2 ready means that we are ready, technology-wise, able to switch from natural gas to hydrogen. The key point is, what do we need to make it? To make it, we need to have competitive baseload hydrogen at the plant gate. So this is where we need to effectively connect the most competitive production source to the consumption point. And this is where the whole infrastructure is not a challenge, it's the biggest opportunity we can have to make it work, to make sure that we have identified the right hydrogen source to the consumption point, so that this shift from natural gas and hydrogen can happen as quick and as competitive as possible. And this is really what we are here for and what we are committed to, so that it can happen from coal to gas and then from gas to hydrogen. And from what I hear already here, this transition gas to hydrogen really must go together. One will go down, the other will go up, and we need to manage both trends.
Thank you. Maria, you mentioned in your remarks about the broader perspective for Europe. So do you think it's realistic that we can get a hydrogen corridor from the southwest of Europe all the way through to Central Europe?
Let me say that I strongly believe that hydrogen is not the silver bullet. It is a part of the solution. But I insist, and I think that Ursula von der Leyen has right, that it could be a game changer. And by saying this, I think that we have to take into account a lot of complexities that we can face. First, it is the cost. How much will it cost? And the longevity. How long will it be? So maybe we need to consider some kind of complementary solution, meaning that we have to go ahead with transition and using derivatives, mature derivatives like ammonia. Second, it is the scale and the size of the hubs, the ecosystems that we will create. I fully support the approach coming from the industry that we need to prioritize the sectors that we will decarbonize via hydrogen, meaning that we have first of all to facilitate cement sector, steel sector, chemicals and glasses. These are the sectors that they are easily to decarbonize via green hydrogen. And of course, according to my opinion, there are opportunities on this. There are opportunities on this because, first of all, we have a lot of fresh, of renewables, but we have to transform them into hydrogen. So to have something like a pharaonic approach in terms of projects, it's not the right way to do. I think that we have to consider on mature projects. We have already in the pipeline mature project, you have already mentioned them, it's not time to repeat, and we have also to increase the level of awareness and to stabilize the market, to send a very clear message to the market that we are ready to proceed with a clean hydrogen market by concluding RED III, which is important, of course, combined by the delegated act, which is sending a very clear signal to the market, by having a significant and very successful auction testing the waters during autumn. It is also a very important signal. By having a significant amount in terms of money and in additionality by using hydrogen banks. These are not the most, but some of the instruments that we can use in order to send a clear message to the market and to stabilize the market and create a hydrogen market, first of all.
Okay, Rafael, clearly there are opportunities here. What are the challenges?
So when we look at especially a project just like H2Med, for example, there is a clear question of cost attribution, cost allocation. You said it would cost a lot of money, but also distribution of value. So it's a bit like when we're talking about having Morocco or North Africa producing a lot of green hydrogen and sending it to Europe. The question is, why would they just sit on this very important and very expensive fuel or energy carrier that is hydrogen and not use them to actually produce the goods or the things that they can produce with green hydrogen in the place that they are actually producing it? So for Morocco, it's one thing, and you have all the question around CBAM, but it's also a question of intra-EU value allocation, because Portugal and Spain have a lot of renewable. They could produce a lot of cheap green hydrogen, but why wouldn't they use it for their own industry? Why would it go to France and to Marseille, La Fos-sur-Mer, where you have a lot of industry? Why would it also go to the German industry for it to also make a lot of added value products that are produced with green hydrogen? And I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying when we look at volumes and when we look at cost and value allocation, it's a question that we don't really see an answer yet to, and we would be very interested to look at that, because it also poses question of distribution of roles within Europe.
Okay, Stefano, how do you see this? Is this a false market approach if we take that view, or is this simply we treat it as another commodity?
I think, sticking to the infrastructure, we had gained over the last decade a lot of experience with ENTSO-E and ENTSO-G on how to plan a network for gas or for methane or for electricity, and where are the missing links, what are the gaps, what you add, cost and benefit, etc. Now, first time we are trying to plan and imagine what could be the network in the future for hydrogen is a completely different set of issues that you need to address. And information that you need. What you need to look at when you look at a corridor like the one we are discussing is, first of all, what is the expected type of production at the origin of the corridor, and what is, on the other hand, what you expect as demand. And then I think on both ends, here we are talking about a project which has a strong potential because both Portugal and Spain have very renewable rich. We have very low cost of electricity potentially from renewables in the future and a planned higher penetration of renewables. And the demand centers are all located whether in France or further up in the north in Germany. There is certainly a strong demand that will be there. As a strong decarbonisation potential, I think it has a strong potential for market integration for areas that not always are super well interconnected. And I think as an element, the last element that one has to look overall is the cost benefit. And this will be the grounds on which we will see whether this project flies or not. I think I just add that it has also an element, a symbolic element of not only of market integration, but of, I think, around REPowerEU of unity in an area. And I think Madame Spiraki knows very well because ITRE has sent a lot of warnings about the importance of interconnection and interconnectivity in this area, where both on gas and on electricity, either there were a lot of difficulty on interconnection or very, very slow progress in the existing projects. So I think the fact that the leaders of the participating countries have at the highest level blessed this project, I think it's also a sign that we can open a new chapter of cooperation in a regional area.
Okay, Thierry, the supply and demand side of this, how do you see it in terms of the market viability? Do we start small, scale up? Is this, we're using existing infrastructure to begin with? Things like, how does this become viable?
When we discuss, for instance, with our Spanish colleagues, they say that they first will be producing hydrogen for the peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula, obviously. But then there will be overproduction. If we look at Germany, for instance, they are not producing natural gas, but they are a place where there is a big industry that has been using a lot of natural gas. So it's not because the energy is produced on one point that the industry and the consumer will be in that point. And so I think we must accept the idea that the hydrogen, like natural gas, even like electricity more or less, will travel through the places where it is cheap to produce to the places where it is used. So we have realized an analysis which is based on the Joint Research Center methodology just to assess what are the benefits of the H2Med. This is this methodology which is used by the Commission to assess also the PCI candidates. What we found is that H2Med leads to societal benefits of around 40 billion of euros, which is the value of greenhouse gas emission savings. Around 133 million tons of CO2 avoided, say emission saved. And also what is interesting to see is that a project like that will help to avoid curtailing the production of renewable in the Iberian Peninsula, and it will help to a higher utilization rate of the electrolyzers.
Okay, thank you. From the industry side, Manuel, do you see this coming online fast enough for your objectives, or are we going to face bottlenecks, or as Stefano said, there's been a learning curve with other types of energy project which should assist here?
Well, the question is not fast enough.
Okay.
The question is competitive enough or not. As I was saying, we'll make the shift from coal to natural gas. It will happen, so no doubt on that. Then to go from natural gas to hydrogen, you need to make it competitive. And if for that, you need to commit for 15 years on the hydrogen, 15 years on a new pipe and so on, you will kill the business. For sure, because you cannot pay for a new pipe. So you have to find a way to make sure that supply is there, that demand is there, and that transport and storage is not in the equation for choosing. You need to choose hydrogen for its own merit versus natural gas. The rest must be at level playing field. And as long as it does not exist, it will be almost impossible to shift from natural gas to hydrogen in a competitive way.
What does it take to shift to hydrogen in a competitive way?
It means in terms of quantum or in terms of... we need to be, as a heavy industry, we need to be cost competitive. To be cost competitive, you need to get hydrogen at the price of natural gas and avoided carbon.
Okay.
Simple as that. Otherwise, you will have another cost that you are not sure, and today there is no guarantee at all that the customer will pay for that. And you make investment for 10, 15, or you commit for 10, 15, 20 years with no backup from the customer. Quite a tough decision, if not possible.
Maria, that doesn't sound terribly optimistic.
Yes, but allow me to say that in coming from the market perspective, the points that our colleague has already put on the table is the right point, because we have now to send the messages that we are ready to invest, to heavily invest in the infrastructures, and that's why I think that the cross-border cooperation and also the collaboration with third countries, starting with Morocco and maybe with Algeria and other countries, is a very important, significant step. At the same time, we have to understand that the cost could be heavy. The cost could be heavy because I think that the connection is also something that it is needed a lot of investments. And in this regard, I think that we have to be attractive. How can we be attractive? We can be attractive by giving premium to clean hydrogen. Frankly speaking, we have to give a premium which will be at least equal with the premium in the US. And it must be more than $3, speaking with numbers. This is the first one. And secondly, to support the repurposing of the existing infrastructure in order to reduce the cost of the infrastructure needed.
Sure.
And it's not something to decommission the existing infrastructure, because, as I have already said, gas is not disappearing from the market. But we have to shift from gas to clean hydrogen as fast as possible, and at the same time to provide the incentives and the stability to the market.
Stefano, the instruments are there to achieve this, but where do you think that this market stability, this market confidence is going to come from in turn? Because this is it's not just an energy issue, it's not just a decarbonisation effort. There's a strategic element to this as well in terms of Europe's autonomy and energy security over the longer term. So how do we finance this from the public side?
My impression, having seen different projects and talked to many operators, that this is an area where you really need to look for a combination of instruments. And I take the green steel part. One way, of course, to bring down the price of hydrogen is, of course, to scale up and bring down the cost of electrolyzers. The second, but they are not let's say the largest part of the levelized cost of energy for the production of hydrogen. Then you have to bring down the electricity costs, and that's why it makes sense to produce when you have comparative advantages and not wherever you have a consumption center and transport the hydrogen. And then I think you need to work on the demand side. You need to work, as we are doing, through the mandates and the Renewable Energy Directive, and to push the substitution of grey hydrogen with renewable hydrogen. I think you need to also contribute to reduce the green premium, so the operational costs of purchasing the commodity. And I think you have to work at the end also on the branding and on the consumer interest for green products. Because if you look, and I hope I'm not saying something wrong, but talking to many operators, if you look at the impact having produced a green steel has on the final cost of a car, it's a few hundreds euros, even between 200 and 300 euros. And it's something that consumer may be ready to pay if they want to have a green product, not only because of the engine, but because of the overall carbon intensity of the product they want. So for a number of products and for a number of sectors, I think actually there is a gap that we can bridge if you take together the decarbonization advantages and the fact that you can become competitive in a market that has different preferences. But it requires, as I said, not one policy, but putting together in a coherent way different levers.
Okay, so do you think the consumer would bear the cost of choosing to green hydrogen over a cheaper energy source?
Well, frankly speaking, I think that, as my colleague said, the cost must be competitive. If it's not, they will not go because it's just they will die. So, but if I may add something about the challenge that we are facing and what we need to tackle is, I think we need also to tackle a more simple legislative framework. When I look at what we're doing in Europe for, let's say, several years now, discussing on the color of hydrogen, and not only two colors, let's say green and gray, but a real rainbow of colors. When I look to the discussion we had on the role or not of decarbonized hydrogen, the target is to decarbonize and not to make renewables. When I look also to the discussion we had on additionality and the complexity that we introduced to produce a hydrogen which is recognized to decarbonize the system, I think that we are not really helping the development of the sector and the cost, because it brings a lot of uncertainty to the producers and the consumers. And I really think that we must simplify things. And if I go to also the networks, it is the same issue. We are now discussing of a project of directive. In that directive, there are some ideas to go further to what we've done in electricity or in natural gas regarding, for instance, unbundling. We have a solution which works for electricity, for natural gas, unbundling, but some institutions want to go further and to, for instance, to forbid, to ban ITO TSOs to be hydrogen operators. The problem is that most of the TSOs in Germany are on ITO regime. The problem is that the main TSO in France is under the ITO regime. So if we don't simplify, if we don't just say where we are for this point, we will have some problems. Another issue is also the project of having zero tariff at the interconnection point. It seems to be a good idea, but in reality, it will not work. So I really think that one of the levers is simplicity in the framework.
Maria.
Legal clarity is needed, and of course I fully agree that it's needed, but at the same time we need to have a very clear and proper framework in order to have clean hydrogen, and I insist on this because the bet for Europe to become a pioneer, to remain a pioneer in this production and to decarbonize not only the energy mix but also products, as Stefan has already mentioned, and we are supporting this with various legislative instruments, including eco-design, sustainable products, and the packaging waste directive, is that we have to consider what is clean hydrogen. We have the Delegated Act. We do not reopen the Delegated Act. It is a part of RED III. So we have to proceed immediately to the implementation of RED III. It is a key piece of legislation in order to send the message that we know what is clean hydrogen. We are asking from the investors to proceed with investing in RES, and then to give this kind of electricity to produce clean hydrogen. And we also use the installations and the deployment since 2 years before. And this is it. It's clean. It's clear. I know that France has some kind of reluctance in terms of adapting the legislation, but it's not relevant with the production of clean hydrogen.
Is it conceivable that we're sitting now in 2023, halfway through the year, that we achieve these targets by 2030?
Yes, I think it is. With the pace that we're following, and with the pace that the legislation is following, and also with the interest and the international competitiveness, allow me to say.
Okay.
We have to see what is happening in China. We have to see what is happening in the US with IRA. It is important for the EU. Okay. Otherwise, we will be the last one.
Not again. Let's take some questions from our audience. So, Tudi Bernier, we now have an EU definition of renewable hydrogen as per the final RED II Delegate Acts, but not yet a formal definition of low carbon hydrogen planned through a future delegated act. Maybe you want to comment on this, Maria. According to panelists, what should that definition be and why?
I think that Stefan is the person
Okay.
that must
Following on what you said, Stefano, and then Raphael looked my direction, so he's next.
Of the legislation.
Indeed, I think what we are aiming to is to mirror in a forthcoming delegated act the same methodology that we use for identifying the greenhouse emissions, the methodology calculating greenhouse emissions for renewable hydrogen. We need first to have the gas market package adopted. That will be the legal basis, and there are the provisions that are referring to low carbon hydrogen, and that on that basis we will have the delegated act. We will try to come immediately after the adoption as soon as possible, because we need it's an important element for the market. So we'll try to be as fast as we can, but we need first the gas market package.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree that we need the gas package to be basically concluded, because this is what actually provides the legal basis for the delegated act. It's still a bit weird that policymakers are actually giving their opinions on low carbon hydrogen without knowing exactly what it is, because it's not really,
Why does that surprise you?
Yeah, Brussels is like it is. But no, there is still an issue of knowing what we're talking about when we're talking about low carbon hydrogen. Most of the time it's blue hydrogen. We know the French also want to have this nuclear hydrogen, which is also a question mark, because the framework we have with green hydrogen is quite complete now, and this is probably where we should focus our efforts when we look at that, but also when we look at the global price of gas at the moment. You know, there were big hopes on blue hydrogen a few years ago. Now it seems a bit more uncertain, because it would cost a lot of money also to source gas and then to actually transform it and transform it into hydrogen. So these are questions that are related, but still we need the gas package to be done first, and on that I think the trilogues will tell what's going on.
Okay. Anyone else, Maria, do you want to follow up? No?
I think that the most important issue is at the very first level to explain to the member states that we have to increase our pace. And it is a clear message to all of us, including my home country, Greece, because we need a lot to do in order to become a hydrogen hub, and in terms of geographical position, we have a privilege. But the case is that we need an overall European legislative framework with very clear definitions and clear signals to the market.
Sure.
Yes, my message will be, first, I agree with the panelists that we need this package for the end of the year, hopefully. But I really think that what we need is non-decarbonized hydrogen. Will it be renewable or not? What I think is that we should have something which is neutral from the technology point of view, because we don't know exactly what will happen. Nobody knows what will be the cost and the technologies. So if we close some possibility now, it's maybe something that we will regret in the future.
Okay, Emmanuel?
Just an additional point is that on the hydrogen infrastructure need, there is one point we must not forget. It's true for the industry, because we will electrify much more than before. It's true for the overall, I would say, consumer park, be it the households, the industry, and all the others, is that if you don't have an hydrogen infrastructure, your electricity grid will collapse. That's for sure.
That's optimistic.
No, but that's a reality. It's not possible to follow with the electrification if you don't have an hydrogen network. So it provides as well a support and a solution to that. That's one of the big challenges. So this is something that we need as well to keep in mind and to see as part of the solution.
Competition molecules with, versus electrons, it is something that it is complementary. It is the sector coupling as well. It's also, of course, we need hydrogen, as we need gas, as we need everything that is stabilizing the market.
Stefano, you wanted to follow up?
No, because I have an instinctive reaction every time I'm confronted with technological neutrality. Because one line of reaction will be to explain in what ways we are technologically neutral. But there is one element that I still don't get, because it seems that we are prohibiting the trade of any forms of hydrogen. And it's not. No one is treating in any discriminatory way any forms of hydrogen. Even in our strategy, we're relatively neutral and agnostic, that the blue hydrogen in different forms will have to come in first. It's coming in at a different price point. Now, after REPowerEU, we are a bit more skeptical about the use of gas, even if then there is a capture. The only thing that we are doing is to concentrate some instrument of support, mainly on the supply side, partly also on the demand side with the RED III, on what we think is the most consistent and coherent form of hydrogen with our decarbonisation ambitions. And second, the one which needs the most support. So the only way in which we are taking a positive preference for one form of hydrogen is on the direction of some forms of subsidy and supplies. But there is nothing in our legislation in the gas market package that says you cannot put in the pipe one color of hydrogen or another, or that is prohibiting or in any way negatively affecting the trade into other forms of hydrogen. And for me, it's a form of consumer protection. If a consumer wants to buy something that is fully renewables, has to know, based on clear rules, what he's buying. Because the worst for me is to sell one commodity saying that it's something, while in reality I use electricity from the grids or use other forms to produce it.
Rafael, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, I think more, not really on the topic of technology neutrality, but on the topic that also Thierry was mentioning, which is integrated planning. And I think, we were saying there need not to be any competition or battle between electrons and molecules and all of that. And this is absolutely true. I would absolutely support that when we look at the future of the network, we do need to plan the electricity grid with the hydrogen grid, because electrolyzers and have a strong relation with the electricity grid, but also with the gas grid. Unfortunately, that's not really what we're saying at the moment, where in the gas package, for example, we're talking about having the gas network operators and hydrogen operators operating together, but we don't see where electricity sits and where it would be integrated. And this is a big problem for us, because of course the gas network operators have a place, but it needs to be on an equal footing with other networks, so that we're really sure that we are not favoring one or the other.
Okay, thank you. Thanks also to Thierry for that question. Thierry was from CO2 Value Europe. Next question is from Luca Franza from Edison. The southeastern neighbourhood, namely the East Med Basin, has great hydrogen potential thanks to cheap renewables and good load factors for electrolyzers. How can the EU facilitate imports from there with a view to achieve the 10 megatons target by 2030? Who wants that question? Rafael.
I'm not sure I really want to comment on that. I think, the question of maximizing where we can produce renewable energy, or when we can produce electricity to actually make green hydrogen, makes sense. But again, I think one of the big things that we're seeing at the moment is that the volumes of hydrogen that we will have, especially in the early 2030s, will not be that huge. And so we really need to concentrate where we use hydrogen in the most difficult to electrify sectors, on heavy industry. So these big projects may have a rationale if we are able to really show that there is production and there is demand and they will be connected, then it should not be a problem. But producing for the sake of producing and then hoping that we'll find demand somewhere is also a bit more tricky. That's why planning is important.
I think that we have the potential to increase the production, to scale up the production, particularly in Northeast Europe, because it is important to say that we are in this neighborhood too. We have also third countries that they can also increase their potential in terms of production. And the easiest way to transform the hydrogen into derivative is ammonia. It is the most mature. So we have to consider how can we facilitate the very first level of production. And then in this regard, I would like to underline the question of neocolonialism. I think that we have also to invest heavily in these areas, particularly in third countries, in order to increase the potential for us, and in order to have electricity enough and also hydrogen enough, clean hydrogen, and at the same time to closely monitoring these kind of investments in a way of independence authorities from the local governments, because a lot of questions are raising, and I think that the merits that the people need in their countries, it is important to give them back. So I think that it is a very, very big opportunity. We have to consider the easiest and the low-cost way in order to increase the capacity of producing clean hydrogen, particularly in this area.
Thank you. Stefano, anything to add there?
I think Edison knows well the market of Southeastern Europe. I think there is a lot of things moving there. I see that region and that corridor slightly one step behind the southwestern corridor and northwest corridor, the North Sea, and also possibly also the Baltic Nordic corridor, but still with a lot of potential. I think it's more than just a future fantasy. There is also already good interconnections with Bulgaria, to Romania. There are towards Italy as well. So I think it's an area where we look with a lot of attention. As I said, there's slightly more work to do than the other emerging corridors, but I think it is. It has a lot of potential.
And DESFA has already proposed a lot of mature proposals concerning hydrogen backbone in terms of Greece, Bulgaria, and North Macedonia. But it remains to be seen if they are finally be eligible in terms of CEF, Connecting Europe facility. But it is a good start. It needs time, I think, to mature.
And if I may,
sure.
what is important, again, we are going now for the first exercise in these projects of common interest, etc. But I think what will be important is to try and imagine a very even and a gradual development of a network across the entire Europe. I think it will be that will be also a good signal that this is an agenda for everyone, and some will need more time, will need to, before being mature, for other steps, and even for access to funding, we'll have a lot more work to do. But I think it's important we start to see that there are dots and connections across the entire map of Europe.
Okay, Thierry, how do you see this in terms of the connections across the map?
I fully agree. I think what is at stake is first to build around those areas I was mentioning in the beginning, and then trying to connect them between themselves. And this is why planification is absolutely key, because first, if we look at hydrogen system, we need to have the planification taking into account the project of production, the project of consumption, the storages as well, and the pipes. And if we do that, we will avoid to build useless infrastructure, because nobody wants that, nor the TSOs, because we don't want to invest for nothing and have no customers, no money. So it's absolutely essential. Then it is also essential to, as Raphael said, to planify with natural gas and electricity. Why natural gas? Because a part of this hydrogen network will come from the existing natural gas. So we have to plan the decrease of natural gas consumption, to get new, let's say, available infrastructure, not new, but existing infrastructure, to be able to repurpose them. So we need to planify together the decrease of natural gas and the increase of hydrogen. And third, why it is important to get this connection with electricity, it is because electrolyzers are a bridge between the electric system and the hydrogen system. So the place where we will put the electrolyzers will give a result on the planification of the electric grid and hydrogen grid. So we have to look at from a holistic point of view to those three systems to make the good choices. I think it is really key.
Thank you. Emmanuel, anything to add on this?
No, I think it's completely correct, and this is why you have to be able to connect the most competitive production places with few electrical interconnection to the consumption place through the transport and the storage. And this is really what is the overall plan, and this is what we should build. And it's the only way to be competitive.
Thank you. Next question is from Maud Bowman from Global Council. How can we make sure that the EU hydrogen strategy is deployed across all member states? What do you think of Greece's proposal to set quotas per country in the EU hydrogen banks auctions? Maria's going last in this one. Raphael.
Yes, I will.
Yeah, on this I will just repeat what I've said earlier, is that if we have not that much volumes, if we have also a question of value attribution across Europe, we would need to look at incentivizing the countries that have strongest added value in their industrial policy, and really link the industrial policy to the creation of hydrogen, or to the production or demand of hydrogen. Because not everyone can build the same thing and not everyone can have the same role, but still we need to ensure that there is a good enough distribution of added value and not everything going to one industrial powerhouse, while the other countries are actually just supplying the hydrogen and the feedstock. So it's really about also having a good industrial policy to look at the best added value at national level.
You agree with that? No?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Anybody else on this? Maria?
Well, let me say a few things concerning Hydrogen Bank, because I have also the responsibility as the shadow on behalf of the Parliament. It is just one of the instruments that we will use in order to increase our capacity in terms of clean hydrogen. And I would like to explain that first, Hydrogen Bank is important to give the opportunity for new ideas, innovative ideas, in order to scale up. I strongly believe that we have to wrap up the whole value chain of clean hydrogen, and each part of the value chain, starting with the innovative ideas which are facing in a joint undertaking a kind of bottleneck effect. We have a lot of innovative ideas, we cannot commercialize them due to the lack of money. So it is important to go ahead with using Hydrogen Bank. It is also important to support the auctions with the 800 millions. It is also important to give a signal that we have Hydrogen Bank, we have the IB, we have also to engage the private sector. And when it comes to the member states, every and each member state has its own strategy regarding hydrogen. Now, since we're clarifying the environment in terms of investments, I think that these kind of strategies should be more complementary to each other. And it is very, very important for me. According to my opinion, the most mature strategy is the strategy that is Germany providing to the table, and also the strategy from the Netherlands. The Netherlands, they start already using the strategy in order to build the proper infrastructure. But Greece is not in the same position. We are trying to start working on the infrastructure. As I have already mentioned, the Greek TSO has already proposed something in the important project of common interest. But for this time of period, we have just gas infrastructure. And we need to have hydrogen-dedicated infrastructure, particularly in Western Macedonia, which is a region under decarbonisation. It is a region under transition, on which Hydrogen Valley will be fit and proper, for instance.
Just on Hydrogen Bank, can you tell us a little bit about how Hydrogen Bank works specifically?
Yes, it will be a bank which will cover 3 billion at the year of 2023. It will be a part of the budget, of course, and the first 800 will be used for auctions. But it is also important to understand that we are working on it in order to have a point of reference in terms of investing in hydrogen, in clean hydrogen only. Because the part of hydrogen that we would like to wrap up, and the part of hydrogen we would like to take off, is clean hydrogen. Hydrogen coming from renewable energy.
Okay. Stefano, anything to add?
On the point of the pan-European nature of the hydrogen agenda. I have a lot of sympathy for this argument, and I already said that I think it's one of our priorities is to make sure that everyone has stakes in it. But I think it's more an issue that you can address through a lot of technical assistance, a lot of expertise sharing, best practices sharing, and of course a bit of fairness in the distribution and access to the different funding instruments. But I think I will be a bit more resistant to the idea of quotas and a juste retour, especially when they use European money. One way we can, I think it's unavoidable to give member states a sort of return on what they invest, if we use the bank, for instance, to pool member states' money in addition to the European money. In that case, if you use the auction as a service for member states, I think it's normal that they can ask that this goes to their industries or goes to certain, how can I say, delivery points, certain infrastructure for them. It may well be that some member states are interested in getting the hydrogen and access to a European Hydrogen Bank funded project simply because they want just the transmission through their country, not necessarily it stays in the country, but at least they start having a stake in it. So,
okay, thank you. Let's go to questions from Olivier de Bloch. Olivier from Ubiquity asks this to Raphael. What is the threshold to consider green hydrogen as cheap?
What's the threshold for cheap hydrogen?
Yeah. What's the price?
I wouldn't say anything on that. I think this is all very volatile and also very depending. I think our friends from the industry might have
Sure.
a better idea on that.
It's not a matter of cheap, it's a matter of being competitive.
Yeah.
That's completely different.
What's the closest benchmark you would think in terms of what's the next best thing that you're going to price against?
Well, this is what I was mentioning before. In our shift from coal to hydrogen, we need to be competitive, hydrogen versus natural gas and carbon costs included. So,
Okay.
and that's a challenge. But this is what we need to reach to remain competitive.
Is that going to be a fair comparison though, when the carbon costs are probably not going to be clear for some time? Maria?
Indeed, indeed. We need a carbon price, and it is important to explain to the person who is posing the question that everything is interlinked and it is dependent on the prices in the market.
Okay.
If we have a price in the market of natural gas of 0.5, what is the proper price for clean hydrogen?
Okay, let's go to another question. This one's from Anton Benici. What are the implications of green hydrogen on the demand for critical raw materials? Manuel.
Well, I don't know what you include into critical raw materials. If it's the European Union definition, still is not in. Yeah. That's a pity, but still is not in. So I'm not sure that there will be a big, I would say, impact on the demand versus because the critical raw materials are for batteries, electrical vehicles, and so on. So not necessarily linked to the hydrogen production or demand, maybe a bit indirectly, but it's more linked to the electrical vehicle and to the batteries.
Sure.
And this is very important, and this is important, it is addressed. But unfortunately, still is not perceived as a critical material yet.
Okay, Stefano.
There is a component of some critical materials in electrolyzers, so there is an implication. And that's why we put together on the table the Net Zero Industry Act, which talks about the manufacturing of electrolyzers as well. And I see the Parliament is trying to expand the definition of hydrogen-related technologies, but also the Critical Raw Materials Act, where we try to also address the issue of dependencies and make it easier to extract and process materials in Europe and also to facilitate circularity.
Okay. A question from Akira Sato. How will the EU stimulate and create green basic materials markets such as steel or cement? Those materials have a double standard market. According to Akira, where the problem is that it's difficult to differentiate in its nature and performance quite apart from the automotive industry. I'm looking to the end of the panel there.
Yeah, I'm not sure I properly get the question.
Okay. How do you stimulate and create green basic materials markets such as steel or cement? I think you've answered that to a large degree.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else want to add to that?
And maybe the question of public procurement and the standards that we've set is important on this in order to increase the demand. But I have no idea that there are studies saying that the performance of green materials are lower than the performance of the linear one.
Okay.
I think it's maybe.
Thank you. We already had a question from Maud Bowen, but I like this one, so we're going to ask. He's going to get a second bite. Is the hydrogen corridor a realistic political project when France, Spain, Portugal do not agree on the role of nuclear-derived hydrogen? Okay. Raphael was first to smile, so he's going to answer first.
Yeah, no, my answer would be that you should actually ask the French official about that, because there is a real discussion indeed about, and we heard about, Paris wanting to put pink hydrogen or nuclear-derived hydrogen into the H2Med. I don't think this is on paper yet, and I'm not sure this is realistic, but this is still something that we see floating around. But yeah, this is more a question of national authorities.
You may.
I'm not a French official.
More's the pity.
But what I hear from them is that they seem to be happy with the very recent discussion at the European level. So I think this question should be more or less closed now, and that I think it clears the path for the H2Med project, and also for the corridor going from Marseille to the German border, as it was mentioned by the Chancellor Scholz and the President Macron.
Okay, I know better than to ask that question to the Commission, I think. Unless you want to answer it?
I can answer saying that I think the fear that with these projects we displace one or the other source of hydrogen production is misplaced. I think H2Med, I think, is a 2 million ton project. There is, I think, the demand in Europe will be much higher in the area targeted by this infrastructure. So I think there will be room for everybody.
Okay, can we bring up the hashtag again for our audience to get another round of questions in as well? It's Hydrogen Corridor for Slido. There you go, Hydrogen Corridor. Send many more questions as you can. We've got about 30 minutes left. We have this question from Luis Ignacio Parada. And Hydrogen Europe and Eurofair called in the Copenhagen Infrastructure Forum this month for the development of an EU H2 network, including storages, as a prerequisite for decarbonisation of the industries and meeting 2030 targets. Isn't the CF, I have to say, I don't know how to pronounce that, insufficient to that regard for a nascent industry? Isn't the CFE insufficient to that regard for a nascent industry?
We need only public money, because the question is that we have Connecting Europe facility provision until 2027. Okay. So there is a part of public money dedicated to this important project of common interest, but we have also to be attractive in order to invest private money. It's not a question only to the member states and also to the EU. It is also to the private sector, which needs to be decarbonized in order to have the privileges and the advantages in the global market.
Okay, we've touched on some of this already, but we want to talk about the entire value chain here as well. Where are the bottlenecks likely to be in the value chain? What needs more attention in terms of production, consumption, and transportation? Where do you see the problems and hiccups along the way? Stefano?
Again, I think we need a comprehensive approach. There is no part of the value chain that is that requires less attention than the others. Mostly, I think maybe in the beginning of our work, we focused more extensively on the supply side, so on the electrolyzers, the generation, and partly on the infrastructure already when they had the 10-year revision. And last year with RED III, we are focusing a bit more on demand, and I think it's good that we rebalance with attention to demand, because indeed, if there is no clarity on the demand side on what they can get on the supply and at what cost, etc., and if they don't move, the supply will now move from paper projects to final investment decision.
Okay. Raphael?
Yeah, on this, I would totally agree. The demand question is a key question. We know that with the RED targets, we have the sub-target on the RFNBO, so we have a bit of ensured demand, or at least we know where it will land, but it's still not at the level that we're seeing. If we look at REPowerEU, it's 20 million tons that should be produced by 2030. It also entails a lot of displacement of natural gas or fossil gas that would be out of the system thanks to these 20 million tons. At the same time, I think I've seen a workshop organized by the Commission on the future infrastructure, and the big industry where there, chemical industry, steel industry, and it was amounting to 6, 7, or 8 million tons max. So we're still not there, and we're not really sure what we would do with these 20 million tons if we had them, but also how we would produce them. So it's good to have ambitious targets, but it's also very good to look at actually what will be the actual demand by 2030, because this has strong implication for the grid and for the infrastructure that we develop. So that might be one of the bottlenecks.
Do we have do we have an export market potential for this?
You mean exporting hydrogen out of
the European Union?
I think we're much more in importer markets at the moment.
I fully agree with this, but I would like to focus on the issue of creating hubs in our ports, because it is important to have the proper infrastructures at the points of demand. Yeah. And the way that we approach the alternative fuels and the e-fuels, it is important to be taken into account. So I think that the demand will increase, and the demand will meet the target of 2010 production here in the EU and 10 imports. I think that we need the infrastructure not only in terms of corridor, but also in terms of refueling, in terms of having the proper infrastructure at the ports, in terms of increasing the innovation, and in terms of encouraging the maritime sector to adapt as fast as possible.
Anyone else to add? Thank you.
Just,
Emmanuel.
just one point on that question is that if you want it to happen, I would say in a pragmatic way, we really need to show pragmatism and to go quick. I mean, all the legislation is for sure a first step and needed, all the support as well, but we need to have in terms of who is operating, should be the same as natural gas, very naturally. It's the same pathway, it will be repurposing, it will be the same type of storage, the same locations, the same. If you don't want it, if you want it to work, we have to be simple. And as a consumer, if we want to make the right choice in terms of economic choice between natural gas and hydrogen, we need to make sure that transport and storage is not adding a further complexity. We need to have a single tariff. At the end, we need to be able to choose only on the merit. The rest should be simple.
Do you think that's realistic politically?
I don't know. You just need to put it on the table and debate. Huh?
What we see in the Netherlands, in Germany, for instance, is that, and in Denmark as well, is that the national authorities have entitled the CSOs to do that job, which should have done the same at the, I would say, the European level, because we would save some time.
Yeah.
And if I may rebound also an answer to the previous question,
Sure.
just to give an illustration on the H2Med project of the support scheme. It's, of course, it's good, the CEF system, but it's a bit heavy and complicated. You mentioned at the beginning that the project has been announced by the Prime Minister of Portugal and Spain and the President of France. It was in October, and then we came to the European Commission to say, oh yes, when I say we, Terega, GRTgaz and Enagaz, we are working on this project. We think it's a good project and we will develop it. But we would like to know if there is a European support. The answer was yes. And if there would be some European money completing the private money. And then the answer has been yes, maybe, probably. But you have to go in the PCI process. Then next year you will know if you are or not in the PCI list. So we don't know yet. And the following year, and that means 2 years after, you will know if you have some CEF money.
But there is also state aid provisions. So I think that the procedure is maybe slow, but it is a very transparent procedure in terms of selecting IPCI first, because there are a lot of countries interesting for not a huge amount of money. This is the first. And second is that the project that we are discussing about is in the framework of the state aid provision. So I think that there is enough public funding coming from different budgets, France, Portugal and Spain, in order to start working on it.
This goes to my point earlier about whether we achieve this by 2030 in an insignificant way, because this is the reality of doing the politics of this. Yes, it should technically be possible, but the process of moving through not just the financing, which you've illustrated in certainly in one regard, and then the planning and even getting permits to build the infrastructure at certain points as well, that's another 2-3 years as well. So, Stefano, are we overly optimistic? It's good to have the target, there's no doubt about that, but are we overly optimistic that these targets can be achieved by 2030, or does this process need to be streamlined and clarified in terms of financing as well in a new way?
There are two answers to that. On the targets, I think you need to be ambitious, you need to mobilize,
Sure.
and I think we are still in time on a trajectory to make it. On the CEF, I have to be very clear, no, the funding is not enough, because a mistake was done by those who took the decision at the time of this multi-annual financial framework to reduce the budget from 7 and something to 5.1 billion euro. Now, already after 2 rounds, we are at slightly more than between 3 and 4 billion left. And this for projects of this, and we have 2 or 3 in Europe, I think this is largely insufficient. We have a lot of money under the recovery fund, 10 billion euro for hydrogen projects, mostly for national projects. This is a cross-border project, so difficult that you have to coordinate national funding if you want to put money there. The IPCI is state aid, again, national funding. So I do think, number one, there is an issue of critical mass for the Connect Europe facility, and I hope that the legislator, the next time we discuss the multi-annual financial framework, will give to this instrument more money. There is an issue of the speed of the process. I totally agree that for a project promoter waiting 1.5 years to know if you're on a list and then reapply for having the funding is very cumbersome compared to other instruments. We can have a more transparent and speedier access. So I think this, I leave it to those who will be there. I think it's for the agenda for the next legislature, having more effective instruments, funding instruments for cross-border infrastructure.
Does that include leverage capital? It's not something we've really talked about here so far. You know, the big projects that Europe has set out to do in the last two legislatures, you know, the leverage side of this, the private equity coming into this, and the scalability. The Juncker Fund was voodoo economics whenever it was put on the table, and it worked. You know, we had Commissioner Katainen running around Europe as a salesman for every project that needed to raise cash. You know, the Americans. I remember interviewing the ambassador at the time. He said, "Look, your projects are fine, but what we need are sort of projects on the table that we can buy into." This seems to be something that would attract investors in the medium to long term. You know, is this a funding opportunity, a funding gap that's there that can be closed with private equity, Maria?
Of course it's needed, because for the project we are discussing the public funding will be approximately 50%, as I remember.
Yeah.
Am I right? It is 50%. So we need the public money in order to cover the possibility of market failure. But at the same time, we need to engage the private sector. And of course, to share the risks. And that's why we use the EIB funding. We also use the state aid rules. We also use the CEF in different versions. The case for me is, of course, that we have not a huge amount of money in terms of CEF. And it is a very important point that Stefan has already raised. We have to change it as fast as possible. And of course, to have something double at the period of 27 forward. And the second issue is to ensure the private sector that their money will be put in an investment that it has, at the end of the day, give them back revenues.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, I fully agree. Of course, it cannot be only found by public money, obviously. And
what I was referring to is the scalability of the leverage capital. It's like 50% is not really in sort of speculation territory. So.
No, but what I mean is that yes, of course, we will have some private equity money for those projects. What we are trying to achieve is first to get money or commitments from the customers of the infrastructure, because again, this is key. We will not decide anything if we have no customers for the infrastructure. Then we will have money from our shareholders, and if needed, we will go to look for additional private money, and of course public money. And what is at stake here is the appropriate risk sharing between all those stakeholders. And I would like to mention something which is happening in Germany today. At least they're working on it, and I think it's very interesting. Germany has decided to ask to the gas TSOs to be the builders of the hydrogen infrastructure, and because they don't want any cross subsidies between gas and hydrogen. They know that at the very beginning there will probably be some deficits, some losses. And what they have imagined is to park those deficits in a regulated fund with a state guarantee. I think it is really an interesting solution. Of course, the details need to be fixed, but I think it is very interesting to look precisely at what they are doing, and maybe to see if this is something that could inspire both at the European or at other countries' level.
Sure, and that seems to me to fit very well with the repower agenda as well, in terms of decarbonisation, reindustrialization, and energy security as well. That the public value in this is more than just economic value in the medium term. Let's take another question or two. John Wilson, don't know where you're from, John. To Raphael, I don't know how to pronounce this. Joint TYNDP. How do we do it?
10-year network development plans.
Right. Sorry. Joint 10-year development network plans. So scenarios already provide an equal footing situation between power and gas. Should we not give more prominence to H2 TSO to accelerate decarbonisation?
Okay, so first question, who are the H2 TSOs? Can you name them, except for Air Liquide maybe? But yeah, so the first question is where the hydrogen network operators do not really exist at the moment. Then the question, and Thierry is talking about that too, integrated planning. But some, and I think Thierry is in that category, say, okay, integrated planning means also the gas, who also have the pipes, then should plan it. But we really think that electricity should also be in there because of having everyone on an equal footing. Two things to say. First, Emmanuel was saying that the hydrogen grid would look like the gas grid. And I would say maybe for industry it's true, but it's not going to be true, for example, for the distribution grid, for the gas that goes into people's home. We know there is an overwhelming burden of proof that shows that hydrogen in heating is probably not going to be a thing or never going to be cost effective. So the gas is going to be quite different. And putting gas or electricity or any network operator over others is probably not a good idea. And just to pick up on what was discussed before, I think it's very important that we talk about public funding to prop up infrastructure, private funding too. But when we talk about corridors and hydrogen backbone, all of that, we also need to be very clear on the need to decarbonize and to decarbonize the gas grid, for example. So we need also to be very clear on, okay, this pipeline might be used for hydrogen at some point, but meanwhile it's still using fossil gas. And by when would we stop having, or by when would we have 100% hydrogen transiting through that pipeline? And we need to also have that conversation and these safeguards, especially when we talk about public funding, because we cannot, be funding an infrastructure that in the end we don't have enough volume to actually have hydrogen in it. So then we keep using it for gas, and then it becomes greenwashing, or it becomes blending, or it becomes things that we don't really want. So this is also something that we really need, sunset clauses and dates for the gas transit.
Okay, just to build on to that, maybe Maria, you want to take this? So from Lorenzo Marino, the Strategic Technologies for Europe platform is meant to substitute the European Sovereignty Fund. Do you think 10 billion will be enough to put European hydrogen on the map while competing, I think that's the main point, while competing against the IRA and China's massive subsidies? I think we touched on some of this already, but then in the context of the geopolitical side and the global economy, IRA and China's massive subsidies, do we need to do more on that? Sure.
IRA, it's not only a question of money. Of course, it is a question of money, but it's also a question of simplicity of the framework. On that point of view, I think they seems to be more pragmatic than we are. And when I say that, it is collectively. It's when I include, sorry for that, the Parliament, the Commission, and the Member States and the Council. I think this brings a lot of complexity to the final regulation in Europe. Okay. It's democracy, of course, but it's also complexity.
But you have to take into account that it is one state. It is the United States, but it is one state. With the same language, with the same legal...
I live there.
Federation law, so...
let's see if it's still a United States 4 years from now.
Consider what is it.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else want to touch on that before we move on to another question? Okay, so from Anonymous, always questionable. Thierry said that there are problematic proposals in the hydrogen package, ITO model prohibition, for example, etc. And insisting on such proposals just delays decarbonisation and increases risks to investors. Is it not high time to stick to objectives such as decarbonisation and be less rigid about ideological rules for hydrogen?
Well, I fully agree.
Okay.
I think, this question of unbundling has been solved 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. now it seems that we are reopening the debate 20 years ago on the third directive, or let's say not 20 years, but 15 years, reopening it, trying to take a revenge or something. I don't understand what is at stake, in fact. It works. Nobody criticizes it. I mean, nor the ACER, nor the Commission, saying it works in electricity and gas. So why should we invent something else, more complicated, more administrative burden in hydrogen?
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on that?
Maybe just quickly on unbundling, it's indeed very important. We have some things that work, but I think there is still a worry sometimes when we look at the next big hydrogen producers and hydrogen network operators, that there will be also gas operators, and they might have, you know, gas clients and hydrogen clients. And we do believe that it's going to be very different, you know, the client base. You're not going to have private consumers that are actually consuming hydrogen. So it's also important to make sure that we do not build the hydrogen grid by, you know, taxing and making pay the gas consumers. So there is still that is at stake, and that is still not really solved by the gas package yet.
Okay, we touched lots of different subjects, and in some ways this question ties these together. What's the vision for the development of hydrogen infrastructure across Europe? You know, what is it that ties all these things together, from local to a pan-European approach? You know, what does this look like 30 years from now, 40 years from now, when we look back? I know it's not going to replace everything, or it's part of the picture, but what does it look like? And if we can just try to draw that together into a clear narrative.
Do you know how much money is needed in order to have such kind of backbone?
No.
The estimation coming from Hydrogen Europe is 320 billion.
Okay, over what timeline?
I think that by the end of 2030, but it's not the case. The case is, where are the money? We need the money on the table.
Leverage capital.
I think that nobody knows, in fact, what will happen and what will be needed in hydrogen infrastructure. We'll see. It will depend on the development of the industry, and we will build the necessary infrastructure synchronized with the development of the industry. It's what has been done in electricity grids, what has been done in natural gas grids, and I think we cannot afford to do differently, because it would be too risky to do so. So I think we should not be afraid of big amounts, because if we do that, we can do the same with the electricity grid. The amounts of money to put in the electricity grid and in the electricity production system is just huge. Will it be possible? We don't know. But I think we need to use all the levers possible to enable this energy transition. And electricity, for sure, is probably the main, but the molecules and hydrogen and also green gases will also be there. Not natural gas, it will be eradicated, but the green gases will be there as well, not only hydrogen.
Okay, Stefano.
Our vision is of a gradual development of the backbone network in Europe. At first, we'll start with very limited point-to-point connections around certain industrial clusters where there is a lot of demand already in refineries, chemical, heavy industries, and generation is close to, there is a proximity to sources of very cheap renewables or other sources at affordable costs, and then gradually we'll expand the network to connect the areas of high demand, which exceeds the possibility of local generation, to areas where generation is cheap and there is a comparative advantage. And progressively, these will cover the entire continent, mainly through repurposing of existing network, but in some cases also through new additional pipelines. And this brings me, because I cannot be completely silent on the point of unbundling, because there is a logic in the unbundling proposal, in the unbundling principle in competition law, which is linked to the need for an optimal development of the network. If you want a network that is avoiding either an excess investment in additional pipelines that you don't actually need, or on the contrary, will not develop them because there is an interest in keeping them for natural gas for a little longer, to keep a market that is being reduced, you need operators that take a decision based on cost-benefit assessment and the genuine interest of the development of the hydrogen market, not for other reasons. And you can have this model, competitive model, with pure hydrogen operators taking infrastructure decision on this merit basis, only if you have a separation between the activities that are done in the gas sector and the activities that will be in the branch that is dealing with hydrogen. And the optimal model is a full unbundling and a full separation. You create a subsidiary and they do the business. We were thinking that were, at least for a transitional period until 2030, other models. The ITO of all models in the gas sector, I say many are praising this model, but it's the one that is more difficult to monitor from the regulators and the one that has the least effective safeguards in case of contamination of interest. So we had maybe a visionary or a strict competitive position in the beginning in our proposal, because we wanted to create a level playing field across the single market. We wanted to have competitive players and push as many pure hydrogen new players and not have a legacy of the gas market. Now, I have to reassure everybody, because the pragmatism is there in the rooms of the Parliament and the Council. I think both have taken a more, let's say, let's call it pragmatic attitude. So in the end, I think where the landing zone between the Parliament and Council will be is that even at the end of a transition period, where it will be set, I think the ITO model and the ISO model will also be
to be available. Useful to have a competition commissioner that would want to work in European Investment Bank as well, then, would it?
Okay, you're already political, I think.
So, okay, we're really coming close on time here as well. Anybody else want to finish on that comment? And then otherwise we're going to do, okay. So let's go to our final remarks as well. Start with Manuel and work our way back to Stefano.
Yeah, so just conclusion on my side that we are, as a company committed to the net zero in 2050, hydrogen will be part of the solution to bring that to net zero, that's for sure. Then we need to make it in a competitive way, and for that we will definitely need to have a possibility to have the infrastructure present, to have a base load sourcing so that we can run our industrial processes in a safe way with hydrogen and in a competitive way. We really need that, and it's part of the solution, for sure.
Thank you. Thierry?
Well, you will not be surprised if I say that infrastructures are key in this energy transition, and not only hydrogen infrastructure, but as well also electricity infrastructure. That's why we need absolutely integrated vision, integrated planning, and also long-term targets, because we need to have to bring visibility to the market. And finally, I think we need simplicity and pragmatism in the package and in the framework.
Simplicity and pragmatism. I like those words. Raphael?
Yeah, I would support what Thierry is saying about integrated planning. This is something very important if we want to really be able to build a cost-effective infrastructure grid tomorrow. But it also means that we need to have clarity on the supply and on the demand, where we will actually produce that hydrogen and how much, who will be the off-takers and where will it be consumed. This is not something we're seeing yet at the moment, but time is ticking to do it.
Okay, thank you. Maria?
We have to act fast, and I think that our beauty, our competence is to provide stability and predictability to the market, legal clarity, and at the same time to push for funding, at least to local projects, in order to increase the capacity of hydrogen valleys and also for the industrial areas that they need to proceed with decarbonizing itself.
Thank you. Stefano, last word.
First, what I learned from this discussion, I think the infrastructure planning in hydrogen is a process. You cannot imagine to have already now all the elements and all the map clear in your mind. I think we will need to get there step by step. Not everything can be funded now in the first step, but it will be important at least to start putting some markers on the map and give an indication where we are going. Second, that we need a lot of complementary elements. Infrastructure planning needs a lot more of information on where the demand is, how it will come, where generation is, and how you support them, and to give more clarity to investments on both sides. So I think the European Hydrogen Bank and the work we have to do there together to coordinate all these elements and to help building a sort of infrastructure planning or an integrated comprehensive planning of the hydrogen network in Europe will be extremely valuable.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our panel for an excellent discussion today. It's clear that it's extremely ambitious and complicated process. It's going to take a lot of energy to get it done, no doubt, but the right direction has been set. So let me just thank our audience online and here in the studio for their participation today. Lots of great questions. Really appreciate your engagement today. Thank Anna and the events team for organizing, and our studio team here as well with Bonya, Zoran, Malta and Wilson. And all those who helped with the catering. If your audience online, sorry, you're not going to get that part. Join us again next time, and I wish you a good evening. I'm Brian Maguire.